My name is Ted Meyerson. I'm a volunteer with AARP Maryland, and I'm speaking with Geoff Chester, the Public Affairs Officer for the United States Naval Observatory in Washington. Geoff, would you give us a little information about yourself before we talk about the observatory?
Well, I have been involved in astronomy pretty much since about the age of 7 or 8. I have a degree in physics from Worcester Polytechnic Institute up in good old Worcester, Mass. I moved to DC in 1977, met my wife on the first night that I was in town. And in 1978 started working at the National Air and Space Museum in the Albert Einstein Planetarium. I worked there for about 19 years. And then this position opened up here at the Naval Observatory, and I decided that this was the place that I wanted to be, and I've been here for 26 years.
That's fascinating, but I'll tell you what I think is fascinating to me and a lot of people is how do you get a working observatory in downtown Washington?
Well, that's a very interesting question. We do a lot more than just look at the stars. Now, the observatory as an institution has been around for a very long time. We can look at the date of December 6th, 1830, as when the Secretary of the Navy issued orders to a Navy lieutenant named Louis Goldsborough to establish in Washington a facility where we could the Navy could essentially store, maintain, and calibrate all their navigational instruments, such as they were in 1830. There was not a huge number. And the most important of those were the marine chronometers. A chronometer is a key element in celestial navigation because a chronometer is it's a clock that is designed to operate on board a ship, but it is also a mechanical device, and there is no such thing as a perfect clock. There's an old saying that a person with one clock knows what time it is, a person with two is never sure. But the chronometer is your link to time at a known location, and your job as a navigator is to use a sextant and an almanac to determine time at your unknown location, and that determines your longitude. Well, if you don't know how your chronometer is running, if it's running fast or if it's running slow, you're going to wind up getting lost. So the job of the old US Navy Depot of Charts and Instruments was to calibrate chronometers so they could be successfully used for celestial navigation. Over the years, the number of chronometers grew. The requirements for having precise star catalogs for the creation of almanacs increased. We basically started from a one-person operation to a facility that is now regarded as the world's leading authority on determining the fundamental reference frames for space and time. So if I have to sum up what the Naval Observatory does, it's pretty simple. It's 2 words: reference frames. And our mantra is kind of the same thing. Our reason for being is kind of the same thing as the real estate mantra, which is location, location, location. That is what we primarily serve, is to allow people to determine not only people, but objects as well, things like satellites and interplanetary spacecraft and who knows what else. But we enable these people and things to determine exactly where they are in space and time.
Well, I'm going to get to that in a second, but I can't help but reference the fact that you keep hearing about light pollution.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And do you actually observe stars at the observatory?
There are certain types of objects that we can observe. The telescope that we use for that is the telescope that was used by one of our astronomers, Asaph Hall, to discover Phobos and Deimos, the 2 moons of Mars, in 1877. That telescope will be 150 years old in November. We can actually still use it for making observations of certain types of objects in the sky, even though we are in the middle of a major metropolitan area. Now, that said, in the 1940s, the light pollution and the air pollution got pretty much to be where it is today. And we could no longer use our largest telescopes to their full capacity. So we found a site about 5 miles west of Flagstaff, Arizona, and started relocating our larger instruments out there. Flagstaff has extremely aggressive outdoor lighting codes, and it is so far the only designated international dark sky city. So the vast majority of our optical observing is done out there. But there are certain objects that we can still observe from here in the middle of town. There are technologies that are available that will help with the light pollution. But ideally, of course, we'd love to be able to get the same regulations here that they have out in Flagstaff. And then everybody who lives in the area can enjoy a nice dark sky.
I've often wanted to see a dark sky. I haven't made that yet. So how do you then, what do you do? I understand the product.
Right.
How do you get to the product of giving people information that helps them locate themselves?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to establish a reference frame in the sky. And there are lots and lots of things in the sky that we can use: bright stars, planets, moon, sun, that sort of thing. The problem is they all move. So if you want to establish a fundamental reference frame, you have to find an object in the sky that doesn't move. And those objects exist in what are called quasars, which are the extremely remote supermassive black holes that formed in galaxies that formed right after the creation of the universe. These things are located tens of billions of light years away. And they are very, as we say, bright sources in the radio part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And they are also point sources. And they are so far away from us that they do not show any motion on the XY plane of the sky. We observe continuously about 5,000 of these that are scattered all over the sky, as well as about 1 million active galactic nuclei, which are similar, but a little bit closer to us. And that gives us kind of like a network of surveyors' benchmarks here on the Earth. And we can then use those positions to determine the positions of other objects in the sky. And when it comes to finding things in the sky that are moving, and that includes the Earth and the way it rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun, we can reference all of that to this celestial reference frame and determine very precisely exactly how the Earth is turning and how a particular spot on the Earth is related to this reference frame in the sky. So that's the spatial part. The other thing you need to know about is time. And we are the people that provide time exclusively for the Department of Defense for all activities that require precise time. And the way we do that is we operate what are known as atomic clocks. Now, these are not the kind of thing, it's not like radioactive decay or anything like that. You can walk into the rooms where the clocks are, and you won't glow in the dark when you leave or anything like that. Basically, a clock is two things. It is an oscillator, something that gives you a periodic variation, and a counter. So you can have something as simple as a pendulum that swings back and forth once, twice a second, or you can have an electron in an atom that vibrates at a certain frequency. And we take advantage of the fact that these electrons vibrate at very specific frequencies. And when we put them under the right conditions, we have a very, very precise oscillator that we can then use to measure the passage of time. That's the basic idea behind an atomic clock. So on a day-to-day basis, we know what time it is to a precision of about 100 trillionths of a second, plus or minus per day. So imagine what it's like being late for work around here. But that allows us to establish the temporal reference frame. So you know where you are in space and time. And this is extremely important because, you know, a lot of us today have, whether we know it or not, we have GPS receiver, global positioning system receiver built into our phones. And when you pull up Google Maps or Waze or whatever like that, it shows you where you are to a precision that's measured on the order of 10, 12, 15 feet. This is all enabled by the fact that we have this very, very super high resolution, immovable reference frame in the sky and a very precise time scale reference here on the Earth. And the Earth, you know, everybody thinks the Earth, you know, rotates once a day and it goes around the sun once a year and stuff like that. On the grand scheme of things, yeah, it does. But when we start looking at it on the smaller level, the Earth's rotation speed is not constant. It's actually slowing down due to tidal interaction with the moon. And there are a number of other effects that speed it up or slow it down on the order of a few microseconds, millionths of a second per day. But if you are using a radio-based navigation system like GPS, those signals from the satellites are traveling at the speed of light, 186,200 miles per second. At the speed of light, a photon carrying that radio information will travel about 30 centimeters or 1 foot in 1 billionth of a second, what we call a nanosecond. Okay? Now, if the Earth's rotation speeds up or slows down by a few microseconds on a day-to-day basis, a microsecond is 1,000 times longer in duration than a nanosecond. Now you have a position error of 1,000 feet. And if you have 5.28 microseconds, you have a position error of 1 mile. And if you have a position error of 1 mile, you might as well be using a sextant, a chronometer, and an almanac, because that's the kind of precision you're going to get with celestial. So this is why having these very, very precisely determined reference frames is important. We are the timescale reference and the Earth orientation reference that is used for the global positioning system to calibrate all these errors out and tell you where you are when you pull up your phone and look at Waze.
How does it get from you to me?
Magic. No. So GPS receiver is constantly receiving timing information and information about the positions of the satellites. That's constantly being beamed down to a GPS receiver. And your GPS receiver has a little computer in it that basically takes all that information and chunks numbers and stuff, and it says, aha, this is where I am. And then you just look at the display and it tells you.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
It is fascinating. Today I can take my watch and know it'll track where I'm walking and show me a map and how far I went, and it's accurate from one side of the street to the other, which is is pretty amazing.
Yeah. We were actually over in Iceland at Christmas time. And we were taking a tour along the south coast and got into a really, really heavy snowstorm. And the roads in Iceland are, you know, basically 2-lane, and they're marked by very small little stakes that stick up out of the side of the road. But when you're driving in near whiteout conditions, it's very difficult to see them. Our driver was actually using the GPS on his phone in high resolution mode to stay on the road as we were driving along this one stretch of highway.
And that sophistication is new. That's sophistication.
Relatively new.
Well, I remember, what is it, 20 years ago?
Yeah,
They released they, they lowered the number of feet you could miss.
right. That was what was known as selective availability. GPS is still it's still a military asset. And on May 1st of 2000, the president signed an executive order to basically tell the military to turn selective availability off. And the precision that you could get with a handheld commercial GPS receiver in those days, which was a brick about this big, dropped from 100 meters to 10 meters like that. Nowadays, GPS receivers are chip scale. I have one, I mean, we all have them in our phones. I actually have one in one of my telescopes at home, so I can take it out, set it up in the front yard, turn it on. It gets signals from GPS that tell it what time it is and exactly where it is. And then it says, okay, I know what time it is. I know where I am. I think there's a bright star over here. It slews the telescope over there, and 9 times out of 10, the star is in the middle of the field of view when I look at it. The applications are just amazing.
That is amazing. Where's it going to go?
It's just well, I think in ways it's only going to get better. We are actually, the military is now deploying the 3rd generation GPS satellites. And this actually, when the requirements for that came down the pipe about 15 years ago, we realized that our master clock system, accurate to a few hundred trillionths of a second, wasn't going to be good enough anymore. So we hired 4 atomic physicists, and they designed and built our current model of atomic frequency standard, which is accurate to about 1 trillionth of a second per day. Now, the funny thing to me is that the technology that that all of these devices, these clocks use, is basically technology that was developed back about the time that I was born, back in the early 50s. And our clock development people tell me that it's obsolete. So we actually have a group of people here who are actively working on developing optical frequency standards. And optical frequencies are 5 orders of magnitude higher than the microwave standards that we're using today. Now, there is a 10-digit number that I could rattle off that tells you, so I'll go ahead and do it. The duration of the second today is defined as the interval of 9,192,631,770 hyperfine transitions of a neutral cesium-133 atom in its ground state. That's 1 second. Now, I'll be brutally honest and tell you, when I started working here, I thought a second was 1 Mississippi. But that is how the second is defined today. Once these optical frequency standards are up and running, they will have to redefine the second in terms of an optical frequency. And the head of our precise time department told me that I'm going to have to memorize an 18-digit number when that happens. I told him it ain't going to happen. My memory, at least. The clocks will, but I probably won't. I'll never get the number. Unless I have a cheat sheet to work from.
All right, so we've talked about the history of the observatory, what the observatory does. Can people come see you?
Unfortunately, no. We are, up until 2017, we actually used to run public tours here. But then somebody in Big Navy sort of thought that what we do here is important. And they tagged us as a strategic resource. Now, obviously, if if our timing capability went away, that would essentially render GPS useless in about 30 days. So the timing capabilities that we have are the primary reason that we have the security that we do today. Now, that said, there are multiple levels of redundancy. All of the buildings that house our atomic clocks are basically, they get, we get our power from Pepco, like a lot of other people around here, which means power goes out on occasion. But all of our clocks actually operate off of huge banks of batteries that are feeding inverters to provide the 60 cycles AC. And those batteries in turn are charged by what we call shore power. And if we lose that shore power, we have generators that kick in to keep the batteries running. We have clocks distributed over a number of buildings. So if a building has some sort of catastrophic failure, we've got 2 other buildings that can take over. And if something catastrophic were to happen that would take the entire facility offline, in other words, a very large puff of smoke, then we have an alternate master clock facility that is located in Colorado Springs. And that will be able to provide the timing necessary to maintain the requirement that we have for precise time today.
Well, I'm disappointed that I can't visit. I know others are equally disappointed.
We have a lot of good information though, and some nice illustrations, images, etc. on our website. So that's one way that you can kind of virtually visit us.
I will do that. What is that website?
I will send you the link to it because it's too much for me to remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's like that 18-digit number.
All right. Well, I thank you very much for all that you've talked about today. It's been fascinating for me. I know it will be fascinating for others. And